so you might know Planet Brocoaster. It's a series that I've fanboyed over quite a few times already, but just in case, it's a YouTube series by Mike Sheets and Mask Bandit, in which they play Planet Coaster and built this park called No Name Landia, and it's one of my favorite series on Planet Coaster, and this park is definitely one of my favorite parks as well. It's very realistic, it's very modest and simple in design, but everything is super well thought out. And the reason that I'm telling you all of this and I'm showing this is because I've had the great honor to be a guest on Planet Brocoaster, which meant that I've appeared on the last Brocoaster episode, but I'm also adding something to the park, so there will be another episode with me in it. So, this is kind of my very shameless plug of Planet Brocoaster. Seriously, it's an amazing series, and you should check out these guys' channels and subscribe to them. But also, I'm going to be working on something. I'm not going to be showing everything that I'll be building, but I'll be showing one coaster station, which is a bit of a teaser to what I'll be showing off in the next Brocoaster episode. So without further ado, let's get into the time-lapse, and I'll explain a little bit more along the way. So as you might be able to tell, I've already got a bit of a layout going on, and a small part of a station building, mostly just some messy roofs put together. Basically the way this works is that No Name Landia is a bit of an American park that goes between the hands of various Planet Brocoaster people, and they all add some parts to it, and I've been given the park file and asked to kind of add anything to it, and the best thing I could come up with was this launched Wing Rider coaster. Now, we'll be showing off more of the coaster in the actual Planet Brocoaster video that's going to come out. I don't want to spoil too much yet, and there will also be some other stuff in there as well. But in this time-lapse, I just wanted to show off the build of the station, which is really the big building which we're getting into in this episode. So, yeah, the theme in general, trying to stick with what Planet Brocoaster is all about. It's a series that really delves into the story and everything behind the scenes of an actual theme park. So it quite heavily goes not just into the background areas that you see in parks and really setting up the entire park in a realistic way, but also trying to keep in mind what kind of times the different sections of the park would have been built, what kind of money it would take to build these different sections. Like, there will have been some part where the park was very low on money at some point in time and expanded in some cheaper ways. Or sometimes when they didn't really so much invest in scenery, but really had to attract some more of the thrills for the guests, some more of the teenagers and such, which coincidentally is kind of the part where I came in here. I came in to Planet Brocoaster, and the bros kind of told me to add something to the park so that they would have something to work on again, get some ideas from outside just their own bubble, which is actually something that works out quite well, I find, for myself as well. Just getting somebody else to build something in your park, no matter how much different it is from what you were trying to go for or what you were trying to plan, it always just kind of works because it throws you off guard and makes you come up with some more creative ideas. So what I came up with is a bit of that slightly more cheap, less focused on scenery and entire immersion, but more thrilling kind of experience, which the park tried to get in here. I imagine this expansion would have been somewhere in the 2000s, and they didn't really put too much effort into making the entire area one big themed hall, or building rows of facades with buildings and shops, but instead they're just kind of throwing all their money into a ridiculous B&M Wing Rider prototype and theming a bit of the station and the area around that, but as soon as you actually hop onto the coaster, it's all just going to be empty grassland. I'll still try to make that look as nice as I can, but it's really going to be quite simple in that regard. But I didn't want to go quite all out with the station and really just make that the big themed elements of the ride, and let the rest of the ride speak for itself. So, as for the theme that I wanted to go for, it's very American inspired, obviously, since this is an American park, so that's already a little bit out of my comfort zone, since I usually do a lot of European things. So this kind of building is inspired by some national park kind of architecture. I kind of based it in terms of scenery and region on Klamath. I don't know if I actually pronounced that correctly. Let me know, because I'm just a Dutch person who doesn't really know American pronunciations that well, but it's basically somewhere down the Rocky Mountains, like still south from that, but still some mountains on the west coast of America. And it's a little bit inspired in that sense by Big Grizzly River Run in Disney, or stuff like, I guess, Grizzly Gulch in Disney Hong Kong, which also has kind of similar theme, even if it's a little bit more western than that. It's really national park, mountain, lodge kind of theme. So it's not exactly western, it's not really the traditional style of American architecture which parks really usually build because it's cheap, because it's just wood. But it's more of the like mountain log cabin, or yeah, that kind of stuff, that sort of architecture. So I looked up quite a bit of inspiration on what mountain homes, but also log cabins and like these ranger stations and stuff like that look like in the US, and that really served as a basis for how this building would look like. Hence also why I'm really building most of all just these large roofs, these large pointed gabled roofs with all kinds of wooden beams to support it in some actually pretty decorative ways. There is quite a bit of detail in this. One thing that was really annoying about the station though, and what made the shape of the station very bulky, is that I wanted to have this path going over the station itself. And not to throw any shade toward Planet Coaster, or I guess I probably do. But basically one of the things that is quite difficult about Wing Riders is that you've got 2 entrances and 2 exits, basically one for each side. Because you've got a track right in the middle, and you can't really expect people to walk over that track, so you should be able to enter the station and leave the station on both sides of the train. So you kind of need some kind of walkway going over or under the station to have people get to the other side, which Planet Coaster didn't do it that way. There's just an exit on one side and an entrance on one side, or both on the same. So I kind of made this little man-made walkway which doesn't really function as a realistic entrance, but I still wanted to get that in there to make it look as though it were actually a realistic Wing Rider station. So hence why we've got that big walkway in there. The only issue was that it made the station quite a bit more bulky than I was trying to go for. So there's quite a lot of... I guess there's 2 problems with this building. For one, it's on a perfectly square footprint, which already makes it quite hard to make it look interesting. And the second thing is that we've got that walkway going over it, which means that it's, for one, very front heavy, because it's really leaning over the front of the station. And it just means that it's going to be a really tall building with a big walkway cutting straight through the middle. So actually finding out a composition for this building that would kind of mitigate those annoying blockiness factors, I sort of came up with this layout. And I know Mike taught me to just make buildings and make them super blocky, because that would make them look American. That's something I didn't decide to do in the end. Sorry about that, but I really felt this would be a better way. We've kind of got the front of the building jutting out like that with the walkway to create a sort of facade, and it also gives a very nice point to put the name sign on. So it's gonna be called Red Hawk. So that will be a perfect place to just put a big sign saying Red Hawk and just make that a little bit more spectacular. And it also kind of means that there's a bit of a front of the building. I feel that, you know, without that gable jutting forward and really leaning toward the path on the front here, the building wouldn't really have too much of a sort of front facade. The rest of the building is really some roofs in a parallel sort of fashion to the track, with it slightly raised about the track, just so the roof looks a little bit more uneven and interesting to look at. And then there are a couple of points where there's just some stuff jutting out. So we've got a part jutting out at the front there to make that look a little bit more interesting. I was kind of imagining there could be a shop over there, but alas, it's actually too close to the path above it, so I can't actually put a shop in there. but it still looks pretty neat, I guess. And we've got some wooden beams hanging over the actual front of the station, over the queue line there. And then there's a bunch of weird columns and roofs throughout the building just to make everything look a little bit less square and a bit more like one of these mountain homes. Basically, a lot of my inspirations, including many of these log cabins and mountain homes, they really have just gables, etc., just jutting out into every direction. Many of them even having bay windows, things like that, which felt a little bit over the top, but having all kinds of gables go into different direction from the center of the building, that really felt like something to add into the building and add that sort of national park flair to it, while at the same time making it look a little less boring. So that was more or less what I'm going for. It would definitely be a case of where a park threw way too much of the scenery budget at just those very small parts of the scenery that you actually see from the path. So everything from the station to some foliage around the actual first drop of the coaster is very nicely themed and is super detailed, but everything that you more or less just kind of see from the coaster itself is pretty much neglected. Like, they probably, or so I imagine, blew a lot of their budgets on just making, you know, those small parts of scenery, which is, to be fair, what you very often find around parks like this. As you might be able to tell if you're into coasters, a big inspiration for this coaster was Thunderbird at Holiday World. Jeez, I'm sorry, that was actually a very bad mistake. At Holiday World in the US, in Indiana, if I recall correctly. It's basically inspired by that coaster. That was a coin. Because it's also a launched wing rider, but it shares a very similar theme and overall atmosphere, I guess. But also it has that same idea of, you know, just being a not so big park. It's not exactly your Cedar Point or your Disney. Hell, Cedar Point doesn't even theme that well. It's not exactly your Disney or Universal or any one of those parks. It's more like a slightly smaller park that can afford to build large coasters like this, but it's still not the biggest and most themed park in the world. So it keeps it much more focused and smaller like this, is what I really imagine. There were also a few struggles over here with trying to get everything to connect to the path. Basically, here I was trying to optimize my sidelines for the coaster, so I kind of redid that hill part every now and then, since the sidelines here felt really important, because you're kind of... Okay, so you're walking toward this area, walking over a bridge, over the railroad. Now, actually, me keeping that bridge in was kind of stupid, because they built the bridge in the first place at a time when you couldn't have the railroad intersect with the path, which you now can, but regardless, the bridge actually works out quite nicely, because it means you're kind of on this higher plane as you walk into the new area, and you're getting from the old peregrine inverted coaster area into the wing rider area here, and exactly from that plane where you're standing there is kind of the important sideline of seeing the station, and then you see the first drop of the coaster looming in the background. And the placement of the drop is actually very intended in that sense. I kind of screwed over the plans for the layout of the park just in favor of getting the sidelines for this coaster correct, so that might be a very stupid and ridiculous obsession, which I should probably relax with a little bit, but that's the way it works. You walk over from the bridge, you see this station in the front, and behind that you see the huge first drop and also the second hill looming, and the same kind of works from the other side, except it's the other way around, hence why the launch, the first drop, and the second hill are really on display, and the rest of the coaster is a little bit more out back. It's a little bit further away from the paths. You don't really see too much of it. You could probably see some glimpses of it from the trees, but it's really this part of the layout that is on display here. So we've got some interesting foliage going on here. Like, there's lots of gardening around here, which really has to be maintained, which isn't so much around the other areas of the park. This is actually one of the things that realistically is something that I always want to keep in mind, since not every part of the park is very easily reached by people who have to water the gardens, or is even seen by people at all. So Especially if you're going for a realistic look, you want to be quite selective with where you're actually putting theming. And as Mike also said in a previous Brocoaster episode, green is cheap, but colors are expensive, so your amount of flower usage should be generally pretty low. Another issue is that flowers usually bloom seasonally, so you can't really have blooming flowers entirely all over the place unless you're constantly replacing them, but that's an entirely different story. Anyway, in any case, I really put some very selective foliage along the front there for those kind of practical reasons, and similarly, I put a bunch of detail on the station, and that's really just about it. That aside, there really isn't too much theming to this ride. And that is also more or less the station being finished, with just a couple of lamps. We're pretty much there, and the station is good to go. So I would like to thank you guys very much for watching this sort of one-off episode of Planet Brocoaster. And I hope to see you guys in the next real episode of Planet Brocoaster, in which I'll be sharing all of my progress, which includes quite a bit more than just in this video, with Mike and with Mask Bandit and with all of you guys. That's all from me now. I'll see you guys there, and have a good day.